The books all say you can visit the city in a day, and I suppose you could if you didn't have enough time. I did it in 2, plus the day trip, and it wasn't nearly long enough. Today we're going to visit a couple of parks, a couple of museums, and check out some chocolate. Let's walk and talk. Hello, and welcome back to the Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy. I love to travel. I do this on my own, and so can you. I'm here to teach you how. This is the main entry to the public garden behind Ahrenshof. There's a pretty little park, a footbridge leading over the canal to Our Lady Church, and 2 surprises inside. Courtyard here was built near the site of the former water hall and includes 2 columns that were rescued when builders dug up the area nearby. The water hall was the largest covered harbor in Europe and thanks to its unique construction a real wonder. The construction was built over the Rye River which ran through the city. It allowed ships to be unloaded on dry land instead of a swamp. These sculptures are the work of a Belgian artist named Rick Poot. Poot was from Flanders, and he focused mostly on bronze and metal sculpture. Sadly, in my opinion, his Wikipedia article was only available in Dutch, so I don't really know very much about him. I do know that I generally enjoy large format sculpture, and I'm not too choosy about what materials the artist picks. The book of Revelations in the New Testament lists the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as conquest, war, famine, and death. Unfortunately for me, these sculptures were not identified individually, but they are all sufficiently gruesome for anyone to get the point. These are things that we should avoid. This horseman, pointing so arrogantly, may represent war. In his other hand, which you can't see, he was carrying a sword. In Poot's telling, famine is represented not by a starving man, but by a grain merchant carrying a scales. It's highly stylized, but I believe that is what the writer is carrying in his left hand. If you'll notice, he doesn't seem to be starving himself. Perhaps it's because Poot thought that they were making a profit. By process of elimination, we are left with pestilence. I'm not a biblical scholar, so I probably have these all mixed up. Even so, I do think I understand what the artist wanted to convey. All of these things are really bad. This is the Boniface Bridge, which connects the Ahrenshof courtyard with Our Lady Church. On the left, you can see the steps that have been built into the footpath, which were really necessary. When I was there, it had been raining earlier in the day, and it had just dried off, but I could see how you could slip. The right photo shows you the view from the other side of the bridge with a house standing on it. This is the apse of the Church of Our Lady, seen from the base of the Boniface Bridge. From this angle, the flying buttresses that scream Gothic to me are obvious. Here are the apse and the spire of Our Lady as seen from the footbridge. That tower, at 380 feet, is the tallest structure in the city and the 3rd tallest brickwork tower in the world. One of the most interesting things about the church may be the building material. Although you do see evidence of some stonework, it's mostly decoration and trim. Bruges sits on former marshland that's been drained. There's no granite, no marble, no sandstone to be had, at least not anywhere nearby. While it certainly would have been possible to import harder stone, and I do remember seeing quite a bit of it in Ghent, here the mostly self-made rich people who built the church were a bit more careful in how they spent their money. They used bricks that were made locally. Meet St. Boniface, after whom the little bridge was named. Boniface wasn't German, Flemish, or even a Frank. He was probably born in England and sent here in the first half of the 8th century to help reorganize the Christian church. Boniface is the patron saint of Germany, but he's also the patron saint of brewers and tailors. Burgundy exists today in the memory and for its wine, but it was once a large, powerful dukedom helmed chiefly by competent men and a real political and military powerhouse. The Dukes of Burgundy succeeded over a period of about 100 years in establishing themselves as a strong force between the Holy Roman Empire and France. But there were some holes in the line which Charles the Bold was determined to fill in. I think it's pretty significant that the regional territories were more interested in joining Burgundy than in either of the alternatives. The deciding factor in consolidating with the Duke was a relatively safe guarantee of making a profit under the economically stable Duchy of Burgundy. Charles the Bold turned out to be the last of the great Dukes of Burgundy, although he couldn't have foreseen that. His goal was to upgrade himself from Duke to King, and he was willing to fight wars to do so. He died during the Battle of Nancy, the end of the Burgundian Wars. He was buried there initially, although eventually his family returned his body to Bruges, where a magnificent tomb was built to house it. This is the tomb of Charles the Bold. Notice that while in repose, he is portrayed wearing his body armor, and his helmet is set up next to him. Charles was killed in combat at the Battle of Nancy, the final and decisive battle of the Burgundian War in January 1477. The story goes that Swiss mercenaries stripped him of everything worth having and dumped the naked body in a river where it froze. He left behind a 19-year-old daughter. Mary was the daughter of Charles the Bold. When he died, she became ruler of a much smaller territory. She was left with limited choices. Charles XI of France wanted her possessions. In order to counter his appetite for her lands, she married Maximilian of Austria. Mary died 6 years after her father, although in her case it was from a fall from a horse. Her husband had this tomb built for her and a similar one for her father, who had first been buried in Nancy. Mary's tomb is interesting because it depicts the family tree on the side of the sarcophagus. You may have heard of this lady, the Madonna of Bruges. In this pose, she looks down rather sadly at her son. It's a little hard to make out, but she has a tablet in her right hand. Perhaps she was reading the Old Testament prophecies of the death of the coming Messiah. Aside from being intrinsically lovely, this is the only piece of Michelangelo's sculpture to leave Italy during his lifetime. A Flemish merchant purchased it and had it brought to decorate his family's private chapel in Our Lady. His agreement with the church was that she was never to leave. Unfortunately, for an item of that beauty and artistic significance, this was not to be. In 1794, French revolutionaries conquered the area and ordered the citizens of Bruges to ship her, along with some other pieces, to Paris for the apparent enjoyment of the Emperor Napoleon. Then, after Napoleon lost at the Battle of Waterloo, she was sent back home. In 1944, as the Allies were bearing down from the Normandy beachheads, German soldiers retreated from the area. The story was retold in George Clooney's movie, The Monuments Men. The Germans smuggled the sculpture to Germany, enveloped in mattresses, in a Red Cross truck. Unlike so many other pieces of art looted from all over the areas conquered by the Germans, she wasn't stolen to order. The Monuments Men include art historians, artists, and restorers. They would have known about her just from general knowledge, and their mission was to track down and return all the looted art they could find. It took them a year, but they finally tracked her down in Altensee, in a salt mine, and they returned her. The rather large niche in which she has sat for decades was being refurbished when I visited, so I had a hard time getting a good look, but I was able to get remarkably close, perhaps too close from the point of view of security. Churches take a long time to build, and this one was no exception. Because of that, they often show several different styles of architecture. Works began on Our Lady in 1270 in Gothic style, but construction continued well into the Baroque period. This Baroque pulpit is carved from wood, reflecting perhaps the lack of marble for the purpose. Notice the mushroom-appearing piece on top? That was a kind of soundboard designed to ensure that the faithful could hear the officiant's words. This is one of the altarpieces in the Church of Our Lady. I believe this is in the Chapel of the Holy Cross, or at least it seems to fit the description, featuring an altar carved by Cornelius Gaylord with a variety of Baroque styling, including different colored marble, angels, garlands, and cartouches. This is the interior of St. John's Hospital as it appears today. The former hospital is a medical museum with several artistic treasures. Notice those huge pillars. They're not original, as you'll see when you study a painting of the space dating from the 1500s. This painting by Jan Verblok Zicht dates from 1778 and shows what the hospital looked like at that time. There have been some modifications, of course, electric lights, replacement of some of the pillars, and swapping modern glass display cases for what would have been cells for the sick, but it still looks remarkably today as it did. My guess is that the pillars you see in this painting on the right-hand side were made of wood and were replaced for safety reasons. Sick and dying patients lay in their beds in the hospital and looked at this colorful three-part work, which sat initially atop the hospital's high altar. Medicine at the time had limited ability to cure ills. Mostly you either got better on your own or you died. So an effort was made to cure the patient's spiritual health as well. The piece was dedicated to the hospital's patron saints, St. John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. It's called the St. John altarpiece, and it's a large oil painting on oak. It was completed around 1479 by an early Netherlandish master painter named Hans Memling. The painting actually has 5 panels, the 3 you see here, and 2 more on the back sides of the panels. The big central panel in front features a Madonna on a throne with the infant Jesus. Mary and Jesus are flanked by the saints John the Baptist on the left, with his head still attached, and St. John the Evangelist on the right. St. Catherine of Alexandria was the patron saint of nuns, and since we already know that nuns provided a great deal of medical care here in the hospital, it's entirely reasonable that she be here representing them. She's sitting in front of the throne with her emblems, a wheel on which she was tortured, called the St. Catherine's wheel, and the sword that was used to behead her. The far left panel shows us the beheading of John the Baptist. You can see the blood spurting from his neck. The right panel shows a remarkably calm John the Evangelist on the island of Patmos, apparently scribbling his visions of the apocalypse in a book. Hans Memling was also responsible for this carved, gilt, and painted shrine. It honors St. Ursula. Ursula was yet another in a long line of Christians martyred by the ancient Romans. She became a sensation in the Middle Ages when builders in Germany's Cologne unearthed a huge pile of bones which they believed belonged to her and her 11,000 slaughtered supporters. The paintings on the shrine tell us about her life and ultimate martyrdom. This is a detail from the shrine of St. Ursula. The imagery of Ursula getting ready to take an arrow to the heart, along with her little white dog, which apparently represented fidelity to her religion, is a lot more clear than her story. Hieronymus Bosch's Last Judgment, versions of which have decorated college dorm walls for decades, lives here at the Groningen Museum. Bosch was a member of the early Nederlandisch school of painting. The school was also known as Flemish Primitives and refers to the work of artists active in the Burgundian and Habsburg Netherlands during the 15th and 16th century. The painted works are generally oil-on wood panels, either as single works or more complex portable or sometimes fixed altarpieces in the form of diptychs, triptychs, and polytychs. These artists painted thousands of works, but many were destroyed during waves of iconoclasm in the 16th and 17th century. Iconoclasm was the social belief in the importance of the destruction of icons and other images or monuments, most frequently for religious or political reasons. We see it going on to this day. One recent example was the Taliban's destruction of art all over Afghanistan. The Taliban government justified its actions by claiming the works were idols, making them haram, or forbidden, according to Islamic doctrine. This fascinating painting by Gerard David gives not just food for thought, but some insight into the thought processes and behavior of Flemish society at the time. David was part of the school that included both Memling and Bosch, we met them earlier, as well as Jan van Eyck. David stuck mostly to religious themes, so this painting is actually an exception, executed on commission by the Bruges town burghers to encourage honesty among their judges. The theme of the panels comes from Persia. Wikipedia recounts the story about like this. Sisames was a corrupt royal judge during the reign of King Cambyses II of Persia. When the king found out that the judge had accepted a bribe to influence a verdict, the king had him arrested and sentenced to be flayed alive. He then ordered that the judge's skin should be cut into strips and tanned into leather. By having the judge killed, Cambyses had dealt with the immediate problem, but he needed to send a message to make sure it wouldn't recur. A little oddly, at least to my way of thinking, the king appointed Sisames' son as his successor. Since the son came from a family of known crooks, Cambyses wanted to remind the son, who was named Otanes, what happens to corrupt judges. He also wanted him to remember the importance of judicial integrity. He chose a visual reminder. He had the father's skin put on the judge's chair. Although the time frame of the story was ancient Persia, David redressed it in contemporary Flemish clothes and hair. In the left panel, we see the local burghers confront the crooked judge, arrest him, and have him hauled off. In the center panel, the artist skipped the part about the trial. The former judge, now himself adjudged to be a crook, is flayed alive. The message didn't apply only in ancient Persia or Flanders. It still applies, and the painting remains in use, at least as a symbol to this day. In the right panel, we see the new judge. History tells us it was the crooked judge's son, sitting in the executed judge's chair, apparently dispensing honest justice. The drapery behind him is his father's tanned hide, a reminder of what happens to crooked officials. Jan van Eyck was another prominent member of the Flemish primitive school. At this time, portraiture was mostly confined to representations of men and women, either as models in religious paintings or perhaps as donors. Van Eyck's portrait of Margaretha van Eyck, dating from 1439, was revolutionary. It was one of medieval history's first individual portraits that wasn't a saint, a king, a duke, a pope, or part of a religious work. After all that artwork, I really needed a break. I thoroughly enjoyed my meal here, including yet another variety of Belgian beer, the fried potatoes and the Flemish-style beef stew. I would go back here in a heartbeat, maybe less, but since my time in 2019, it's evolved into a sushi restaurant. Just up the street from what is now a sushi restaurant was a place helpfully labeled in English, "I love waffles." It's small, and there were at least 20 people, mostly young people, in line. You can decorate your waffle as you choose. I went whole hog. I don't think you can go to Belgium without at least trying one Belgian waffle. With all those calories under my belt, it was time to head back to the hotel. I wanted to take in one last sight in the city, and this was it. This pretty little garden, a tad overgrown, is in the center of Godshuis. Godshuis was what's called a Begenhof. It was built to house women of the lay order called beguines. Although they were obedient to the Mother Superior, they did not have to take the vows of a nun. They spent their days deep in prayer, spinning wool, making lace, teaching, and caring for the sick. Thank you for joining me today. If you think this video is interesting or helpful, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It's all free to you, but it will help the channel grow. Travel sites and history are often fairly word-heavy, especially background information, so some of my YouTube video logs have companion pieces with more information. There are also pieces that don't make it into video format at all. Check out my blog. The address is armchairtraveler2022.wordpress.com. If you'd like to keep up when I post new blogs or video blogs, or might be interested in short, tweet-appropriately sized posts, follow me on Twitter, where my handle is @armchair2022.